Hello YouTube, this is going to be the bookish video for the month of February. Now it is a little bit into March, so I figured better actually film that one. So I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in February and then the books that I'm planning on reading in March, and I actually also bought some books this month. So there's a little teeny tiny haul. So for those of you that don't know, a word list for books start to come out in the month of February. The Coddle came out in the beginning of February, so that was the one that I started reading some books on. Yes. Words. Words are things that come out of your mouth. So I only read 2 books this month, and I think I read them both before the 10th of February, and then just didn't read anything the rest of the month. So the first book that I read was The Great Trouble by Deborah Hopkinson. This is a middle grade chapter book that talks about the Great Trouble, which was an outbreak of cholera in London. This book follows around a young boy who is an orphan living on the streets, and kind of how he gets wrapped up in helping to solve part of this problem. Now it is based on a true event and actually has real people in the book. They do actually exist in real life, which was something that I thought was very interesting. At the end of the book, there's actually like sections on the different people who were actual figures trying to figure out what caused cholera. This book reminded me a little bit of Laurie Halse Anderson's Fever 1793, which was a book that I read when I was a child and really very much enjoyed. The Great Trouble was a little bit more upbeat than Fever, mostly because less people you like die. Another thing that I found really interesting about this book was it never really explicitly stated what the symptoms of cholera were. And if you know anything about cholera, which I did not really, you know some of the symptoms are not very pleasant. One of these symptoms being described in the book as the boy noticing rice water, which if you have to, Google that, because is a very underhanded way to discuss symptoms that were very common. It was a very strange thing to talk about these symptoms in kind of a backdoor kind of way. You never, like, get confronted with, these are the symptoms of cholera. You just kind of have to figure that out by yourself, which I thought was cool. Like, I feel like it was teaching kids something about the disease without it feeling like you're teaching them. The second book that I read was also a Coddle nominee, and that was the first book in the Lockwood & Co. series, The Screaming Staircase. So this book follows around 3 children who are kind of caught up in this problem in London. Now, the problem, as it is actually called, so I read one book called The Great Trouble, and then the other one deals with a problem. So the problem is an influx of ghosts have decided to take up residence in London, and the only people who can really see them and deal with them are children, which is, I think, a very common trope in ghost stories, especially when this is obviously aimed at middle graders again, so having that be your focus audience, that trope makes sense. So we've got a girl who's very good at hearing them, we've got a boy who's very good at seeing them, and then we have kind of the researcher of kind of the situation and like what actually may have happened there historically so they can figure out what kind of ghost they're dealing with. There's like a ton of different types of ghosts. The author very nicely lays them all out in the back of the book so you can kind of follow along. Totally not necessary to read if you're just going to read the book, because I think part of the allure for it, for me at least, was they just kind of knew what these types of ghosts were and you just kind of figured it out as you went along. While I did enjoy this book, I think it only took me a couple days to read. Part of my problem with it was that these kids continued to talk about how fabulous they were at this like ghost hunting thing, but then on the other hand seemed to make really dumb decisions about how to handle them. So it's like, I thought you knew what you were doing, which is why you started this company, so you didn't have to have anybody telling you what to do, but at the same time you're making really dumb decisions. And that has always been something that's bothered me. It happens a lot in YA as well. It's like the chosen one or the chosen couple or group of kids says they're really fabulous at something and then they actually kind of suck. Those were the only 2 books that I read this month. However, I am in the middle of a few other books, so we'll talk about those now. Number 1, The Martian by Andy Weir. I have not read this yet, I know, but I'm going to. in March. I'm going to read it and finish it. We watched the movie very recently. My boyfriend has already read this book. I'm gesturing to him because he's over there. Second one that I started last month and didn't actually get around to finishing was The Cure for the Common Breakup. I like little fluffy books about towns on coasts. And this is a little fluffy book about a town on a coast. And it apparently talks a lot about food, which I also like. Welcome to Black Dog Bay, a tiny seaside town in Delaware known as the best place in America to bounce back from your breakup. So that sounded cute. There are two things that I'm going to attempt to get from the library this week. One being Chew, which is a graphic novel series. I think they're on volume 9 now. It's about a guy who can see the history of food when he eats it. So he decides to help out the police because then he can taste the people and see how they were murdered. It sounds very gross, but also kind of. The next thing that I'm getting from the library is Soulless by Gail Carriger. I've heard it's very good, very kind of just like a fun book to read, so I'm going to try and read that. And then I also have this book, which I already have from the library, which is The House on Trad Street, which is kind of a fluffy ghost mystery. So it's like all these ghosts are popping up in this house and they have to figure out why they're there. It gave me a very Ghost Whisperer kind of vibe, which I loved that show. So I did say that there was going to be a little teeny tiny haul at the end, and that's because I bought 2 books in the month of February. And one of them is not really even a book, but we'll talk about it anyway. So the first one that is actually a book is this one. It's called The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I don't know. This cover is not the cover I was thinking I was going to get, but I like it so much. It is so shiny. You can see like the veins in the leaves. So anyway, so this is translated from Korean originally. It is about a woman who starts having dreams, like really horrendous nightmares about meat. So she decides to become vegetarian, which in of itself is not weird, but it is kind of weird for South Korea because vegetarianism is very rare in South Korea. So it's weirder than like it would be here. She basically goes insane. I'm getting a very like yellow wallpaper kind of vibe from it. I'm about halfway through it already. It follows 4 different people surrounding her life. The next book that I was talking about is kind of a book, kind of not a book, is this one. I couldn't help it. I had to buy this because it was just a little bit too weird to not own. This is actually patterns of just Benedict Cumberbatch. So I'm gonna make this one, obviously. So there's him as Sherlock. And you get like a picture of what the cross stitch, the counted cross stitch. I didn't make that clear. But then you also get the pattern, which is probably really, really hard to see, but there's like a pattern here and it kind of shows you what everything means. And you can make your very own Benedict Cumberbatch. How weird is that? My autofocus is saying that he's actually the face in this video. Not me. So those were all of my bookish things for the month of February. Let me know down below what you are reading this month and what you read last month. Tell me if there's anything that's on my TBR that I need to read like right away. Have you read any of these and like I need to? Let me know. I will talk to you all very soon. Goodbye.